welcome to Stoughton Politics with this guy. I'm your host, Noah Beit-Aharon, coming at you with a summary of the first week of annual town meeting. But before we even get to that, I want to tell you about recent developments here at SMAC. As we all probably remember, there was a huge controversy last year into the early months of this year as the board of directors here at SMAC chose to sue the town, as well as a few of its leaders individually, for supposed offenses against freedom of speech. I should be clear where I stand here. I read the legal filings and I thought they were garbage, which I told SMAC's lawyers at a producers meeting. This is obviously only my personal opinion and not representative of SMAC, its employees, or its board of directors. I just don't want to be coy about where I stood on that issue. The lawsuit was garbage and a waste of SMAC's resources, but that didn't mean I wanted SMAC dissolved as the select board was threatening to do, and I was very glad when the two parties came to an agreement that would both settle the lawsuit and protect SMAC from dissolution. The agreement isn't 100% a done deal, though. It is contingent upon several events, including the passage of Article 36, which allows SMAC to pay its legal bills out of the money it receives from ratepayers, and the adoption of a new set of SMAC bylaws that will be turned over to the town. Article 36 hasn't come up for debate or a vote yet, but the bylaws are where things have gone strange. On Tuesday night at 9 p.m., I received an email from Bob Mullen, who is both our town moderator and the president of the SMAC Board of Directors, informing SMAC members that next Friday, the 15th, SMAC was going to hold a members' meeting for the adoption of new bylaws. Nothing wrong with that, it's part of the agreement. But this email did not contain either the current bylaws that we are operating under or the proposed bylaws that we are being asked to adopt. It said only that the proposed bylaws would be available upon request. So I requested them that very night. The next day, yesterday, a second email went out at 11 a.m. saying that to clarify the previous email, members should instead call Bob Mullen at his phone number if we wanted to review the proposed bylaws. So I called. Bob did not send me the bylaws. On the contrary, he claimed that he would have to run it by SMAC's lawyers to make sure he was allowed to show me either set of bylaws, current or proposed. Now let me be clear. I am a paid member of SMAC. There can be no earthly reason to withhold an organization's bylaws from its own membership, least of all the ones that are currently active, that will govern how voting will work at the members' meeting. We're not talking about sharing a first draft with the internet here. We're talking about members being allowed to review the rules they'll be voting for and the rules under which the voting will take place. On our phone call, Bob not only declined to show me either set of bylaws without legal representation, he also told me that it was too late for new people to become voting members because you supposedly have to become a paid member of SMAC at least 20 days before any vote to have voting rights in the bylaws that I'm not allowed to see. Maybe you see the problem here. There's no question that SMAC needs new bylaws. It's part of our agreement with the town, and it is my understanding that the current bylaws none of us are allowed to see had the terms of two of SMAC's board members, Bob Mullen and Stephen Bates, expiring next month. Under the current rules, the select board would appoint their replacements. Under new bylaws, we could instead have member elections to fill those seats. But only if that's what the new bylaws actually say. The notion that we would follow a secret set of rules in order to vote for a new set of secret rules that we can't review and consider at our leisure is frankly Kafkaesque. Bob has agreed to meet me here at the studio today after this recording, so I hope to have a useful update when I record this show next week. But I did not feel it was right to have all of this happen behind closed doors without giving you, Stoughton's viewing public, even a hint of what has gone on so far. Maybe Bob is making a good faith effort to follow the rules of SMAC's agreement with the town and doing an absolutely terrible job at it. Maybe he's trying to jam through a new set of bylaws that would make him president for life before any new people can get wind and become new voting members. The fact that I can't guarantee it isn't that second option is unbelievable. One more thing on this subject before I tell you about town meeting. If the new rules we vote for next Friday are above board and appropriate, if they call for new elections, then you, the viewer, will be able to vote in those elections, but only if you become a paid member of the Stoughton Media Access Corporation. If you do so as soon as possible, you'll be able to vote in June elections even if the 20-day waiting period is real. Come into the studio or email contact@stoughtontv.com to get a membership form. And once you fill that out, you only need to show proof that you're a Stoughton resident, such as a utility bill and driver's license, and pay a $25 membership fee. It's that simple. Just like Stoughton's government works best when our electorate is engaged, so does Stoughton's media access channel. If you enjoy my show, please consider becoming a member. If you don't like that SMAC sued the town, you have the ability to prevent it from happening again. If you don't like that leadership refuses to make its bylaws public, you have the power to change that. Please consider doing so. Okay, on to town meeting. We had a rocky start to town meeting this week as we spent 2 full days just about discussing merely the operating budgets of the town. There were a few consent amendments that we zipped through quickly, and then we spent the second half of Monday and basically all of Wednesday night just discussing the budget, and especially discussing one proposed amendment to the budget. So, what was this amendment, you may ask? It was an amendment to take $1.2 million out of free cash and apply it to the education budget to prevent some of the cuts that our education department is being forced to make. The superintendent had a presentation where he discussed how many cuts were having to be made this year as a consequence of reduced state funding. One of the members of town meeting, Marguerite Mitchell, proposed that we should just spend money to ease that burden. You know, we have 41 full-time employees, or at least full-time equivalents, that are being cut in the coming school budget. And she thought we ought to do something about that. We ought to prevent that many people from losing their jobs in our town, and that many kids from missing out on the paraprofessionals, the hall monitors, the teachers that keep them safe and well educated. There was the main source of controversy on that otherwise awesome sounding idea, at least in my opinion, is that using free cash to fill gaps in an operational budget is considered risky business by all major creditors. So the concern was that if we were to take this money out of free cash and put it into an operational budget, like the education budget, then the effect on the town could be very detrimental and very long-lasting. Right? We could have creditors say, oh boy, they're doing this thing that is considered really bad business financially, and we cannot trust them to pay back their debts if they're operating in this way, at least at the same level, right? It's a riskier choice to lend to us under those circumstances, and so that could raise interest rates on all future borrowing for years to come. But even if it was just for like 2 years, it would be an issue, right? It would cost the town millions more than it looked like it was costing the town, because we would say, okay, let's take $1.2 million for this, but that $1.2 million would cost more just in debt, right? In higher interest rates to the repayment. It wouldn't apply to debts we already have incurred, right? If we already have a mortgage for our new school and that kind of thing, those would not see their interest rates jump. But there's a lot of stuff that a town has to purchase every year using debt, and that it then pays back. And if the estimate was that it would cost us over $1 million a year just in debt for an interest rate to rise 1 point. So as a consequence, there was disagreement between the people who really wanted to fund the schools extra this one time in order to to ease the shock of transition to a lower rate of state funding. And the people who maybe thought that was a good idea in the abstract, but who desperately wanted to avoid looking like a risky bet to creditors. So there was first debate over whether that amendment should be ruled out of order, whether it should be allowed. Then infinite debate on procedure and what should be allowed and how should it be allowed, and do we have to do it this way? Could we do it that way? What other amendments should be allowed, and so on. And then lastly, debate on the merits of the question. But I say it this way, knowing that it did not happen in that order. It happened in every order all at once. So we went back and forth between debating the merits, debating the procedure, discussing alternate procedures, and so on. And that took up the end of Monday and basically all of Wednesday, with a tiny exception for when Victor, whose last name I forget, who is in charge of the Cedar Hill Golf Course, came in to discuss Article 6, which we then quickly passed, and went back to debating the budget and the amendment. So let's take this one at a time. Okay. Procedurally, in the past, budget amendments on the operational budget have been an exception to the general rule where you need to present any amendment in writing 48 hours in advance or longer, right? In the past, there's been a rule. You want to propose an amendment? I proposed an amendment regarding special town meeting Article 15, right? When I proposed that amendment, I had to send it in writing more than 48 hours before we were going to vote on it. But in the past, that rule has not applied to operational budget. People have been allowed to suggest something from the floor. You can read the budget day of, stand up at town meeting and say, excuse me, I think we should eliminate the funding for education, right, or whatever. And that is allowed. It does not require you to change the meeting's rules, doesn't require a supermajority vote. It's just an up or down majority vote. However, this year, that exception was not actually written in to the rules we approved at organizational town meeting. So because that had been omitted, because we didn't actually say with the exception of operational budget, there was some ambiguity and a lot of discussion with town council about whether or not the amendment really ought to require a 48-hour waiting period, right? And there was much disagreement, and that was where we ended on Monday night. So on Wednesday, when we came back, it still had to be discussed and debated. And the upshot was, I had assumed, well, of course, this is the way we've always done it, right? So it doesn't matter whether we put off the vote until Wednesday or not, because it doesn't matter. It's on the operational budget. But town council actually advised us that because we had not had that in the official rules that we voted on, if we wanted to make what was always the rule into the this year rule, we actually had to vote to suspend the rules and by a 2/3 majority say, yes, we want to have it the way it used to be, rather than having no exception for operational budgets. Because the debate on this one amendment to this one article had taken 5+ hours of all our lives, the town meeting decided not to suspend the rules. By only 65 votes in favor of suspension and 60 votes against, which is the barest majority, but not enough to be a 2/3 majority, we ended up not suspending the rules, meaning that anybody else who had suggested budgetary changes in the meantime would not have their amendments considered. However, because Marguerite had proposed her amendment apparently in writing at 4 o'clock on Monday, by the time we were done voting on that on Wednesday, her one amendment to the budget was still valid. As a consequence, that was the one thing that we still had to debate and talk about, right? There were the two sides I have described, but I would be remiss if I did not mention that there was kind of a second wing of the con side, of the people who did not want us to pass Marguerite's amendment, right? There were people who stood up and spoke saying, this would not be financially responsible. There were also some people who stood up and made actively bigoted comments, as well as suggesting that we just shouldn't be wasting our money on things like education. You can view the footage. I don't want to spend any additional time characterizing that, but I started to worry as a person who personally thought, despite the fact that I am strongly in favor of the town spending its money on education, I trust the chair and vice chair of the finance committee. Both of them were very clear that this could wreck our budgets going forward into the future, and that they did not recommend voting in favor of this amendment. And so I voted against amending the budget to increase with money out of free cash. And I might have spoken to that effect, except that Deputy Town Moderator Carmel Drews, who was in charge of budgetary discussions, Bob Mullen hadn't recused, he just needed a break. And Carmel said, look, we've been talking about this for hours and hours and hours and hours and multiple days, so I'm just going to allow 3 speakers on the side of pro this amendment and 3 speakers on the side of con this amendment. And by the time I had the thought to stand up, there were already 3 clear con speakers, so I just let it go. But I felt that the comments made by some of the people who were speaking against the amendment were, if this were Congress, then I think our body would have censured those people. I don't think we would have ejected them from the House of Representatives or whatever it is they do in Washington. But we would certainly have voted to say this is inappropriate. There were people shouting them down, right? And it's important when you're doing town politics to be respectful to those around you, to speak with respect about other human beings. I don't know why not all of us accept the notion that all of us are human beings, that those of us who, weren't born in this country, whose parents don't speak English or whatever, don't qualify as human beings that need to be treated with dignity and respect. But that's the case. And having someone stand up at town meeting and speak that disrespectfully about their fellow human beings is really upsetting. And in this case, it also didn't do the financially responsible side of the argument any favors. And I honestly thought, wow, if this amendment passes, it's going to be because of those comments against it. So, you can review the footage at your leisure. Don't take my word for it. I found it very upsetting, as did many others in the hall. At times I could not hear what the speaker was saying because of the shouting. So, in any case, after all that, after a really beautifully given speech by Marguerite Mitchell, the author of the amendment, where she said, look, I understand that this is not the way we're supposed to do things, but I think that in this one case, on this 1 year, this is something worth spending our money on. This is something worth taking risks for. And I get it, and I was very sympathetic, and I was trying to decide right up until, seconds before I voted how I was going to vote. And people around me were asking, what do you think? And I was like, I think I'm voting against, but she made a very solid argument in favor, and that's what town meetings should be about. That's what democracy should be about, is people of good faith having disagreements over how policy should be done and, giving it their all. It was right of her to propose the amendment. It was right of her to speak in its favor. I don't regret my vote against it. And in the end, it failed to pass. Only 44 people voted in favor with 70-something against, which was fairly close because, it was it only required a majority vote. So, 15 people changing their minds would have made the difference, right? And so that was the main event of both of the first 2 days of town meeting. And I greatly look forward to zipping through some amendments and getting to some other stuff in the coming week, because if we go through the articles at a pace of like 4 to 5 on average per day, we're going to be here till June. So with that having been said, please feel free to comment, to email me, to yell at me, to send me nasty postcards about your thoughts on this matter. And until next time, I will give you some updates next week.